One common human experience that makes transformation so challenging is that people often have a real problem and everyone in their life knows it except for them, right? So everyone in their life knows that they're bitter or angry or judgmental, and they are clueless to that fact. Everyone else knows they're a bit arrogant and condescending, and they have no idea. Everyone else knows that they're emotionally detached or cold or unapproachable, and they don't see it as a problem. Everyone else knows that alcohol has become a real problem, or that food is an addiction and they're eating themselves into an early grave, and yet they're able to minimize that problem and ignore it. So the question is, how do we help people experience transformation when it's so hard to see the places where we most need to be transformed? Hi everybody, I'm Greg from Heart Tools, where we make it simple to build great relationships. And in this series on how to create a transformational church or community, we have said that a transformational community is a safe place to do hard, risky, and painful things. Whereas a community or a church where people don't really experience that much life change is a comfortable place to avoid doing those hard, risky, and painful things. And up till now, we have been focused on creating a safe place. And now we're going to start turning our attention to what are the hard, risky, and painful things that we need to do to experience transformation. And the very first hard, risky, painful thing we need to do if we want to experience transformation is to come out of denial about the real problems that we have. So if you want to create a transformational community, you've got to be able to create an environment that facilitates helping people come out of denial. And to do that, we need to understand what denial is and its protective function in our life. Because sometimes we think that someone who is in denial about a problem that they have, they know it's a problem, they're just lying, right? They know they're an alcoholic, they know they're eating too much, they know they're judgmental, that they're condescending, they know this problem, but they're just stubborn and they're lying to us about it. But denial is not when we know the truth, but we're lying to other people about it. Denial happens when I'm actually lying to myself about the problems that I have. And so maybe I have a problem with rage, but instead of admitting that to myself, I have lots of psychological structures in place to keep me from making that admission. And so I may admit, yeah, I lose my temper from time to time, and it's usually the fault of the circumstances, and it's not my fault. And I'm lying to myself about the problems that I have. Now, why would we lie to ourselves? Because when you understand this, you're well on your way to being able to create a transformational community. So to understand the psychological function of denial, we need to begin at the beginning, which is you and I were created to love and be loved. That is the whole purpose and meaning of life, even for people who don't realize that that is the purpose and meaning of life. It is still the purpose and meaning of life. We can't help it. We can't escape it, because that's how God created us. Loving others and being loved by others in return is the only way to experience meaning in life. Now, shame is the emotion that lets us know we believe something about us is unlovable. And so I may experience some shame in an area of my life and think, boy, that's not very lovable. I need to change that. Or shame could be much more intense, and it's not just this part of me is lovable, but if this is true about me, then none of me is lovable. I am unlovable, and nothing could be more hopeless or painful for a person who is created to be in loving relationships than the experience and belief of being unlovable to the core of their being. And denial is a psychological defense against personal annihilation, right? Because if I admit this truth to myself, I am so bad, I'm unlovable, I can't admit that to myself. Either this person whose love I count on, they'll never love me, or no one will love me, or God won't love me. Denial is a psychological defense so that I don't have to experience that extreme sense of being unlovable. So you can picture coming out of denial as a lot like walking a high wire at a circus, right? It is 100 feet off the ground and you're going to try to walk it the first time. And if you were to try to do that, it would be overwhelmingly terrifying and you would be risking everything to do that. And so if we want to create communities where people can come out of denial so they can experience transformation, what we have to do is we have to build a strong safety net beneath the high wire, and that reduces both the risk, right, of coming out of denial. I'm not risking everything to do this. And although it's still scary, it doesn't have to be overwhelmingly terrifying. And that safety net is what we've been talking about up to this point. That safety net is safe, loving attachment to other people. And there are three things that I've experienced over and over again in my life when I've come out of denial that have been pretty surprising. It's not what I expected, but it's what happens when there's that safety net of relationship when we come out of denial. The first thing that surprised me is when I do come out of denial and start talking about my real problems, it's not attached to shame anymore, right? We avoid talking about our problems because it's so intimately connected to our shame. But when we have relationships that are safe and secure, we can admit our problems without feeling this overwhelming sense of shame. The second surprise is coming out of denial is always accompanied by a strong sense of hope that, hey, I'm finally admitting this problem. Now I can get on to the business of growing and changing, right? There's this sense of hope in our lives when we come out of denial that's not there when we're in denial. And the third surprising thing to me about coming out of denial is I started admitting things out loud to other people that I had never even admitted to myself in my most private moments, right? And so it wasn't like, oh, I came to this realization all on my own, and boy, that's true, and I got to come clean and start talking to other people about that. And that happens in life sometimes. But what surprised me about the safety net is in those relationships, it was so safe that for the first time, I could even admit it to myself that this is a problem while I was talking about it to other people. You cannot force people to come out of denial before they are ready. And by the way, other people can't force you to come out of denial before you're ready also. And if you try to force people to come out of denial before they're ready, what will most likely happen is you will tap into their shame. It will be a trust breaker and they will leave. What you can do is create a culture with the emotional strength and the emotional quality where when people are ready to walk the high wire and come out of denial, they won't experience shame and they will instead experience an infusion of hope. And the way to do that is to focus in on the relationship building skills we've talked about in the last 3 videos. Because the first part of the culture is you want a culture where people can discover that next character issue that they have to work through and not be rejected and not be shamed. And so understanding the 4 different levels of finding normal and being able to talk about that and understand that, and then talking from a peer-to-peer relationship rather than a one-up, one-down relationship, those will go a long way in helping people be able to talk about their struggles openly with other people without being rejected. And that's good, but that's not enough, because what you also want to do is provide hope, right? And so if someone comes to you and says, hey, I just realized I'm addicted to pornography, or I'm a glutton, or I'm so bitter, you want to be able to help them. You want to be able to provide hope and power to change, which is why the STAR video is so important, and being able to understand how to access all of God's grace and provision so that we can actually grow and change in life. That's what you want, an environment where it's typical and regular for people to talk about their problems, but also an environment where people are experiencing slowly, perhaps, stage by stage, day by day, week by week, but they're experiencing real transformation and growth. And when you have those two elements in your culture, you have a place that is pretty ripe for people to be able to come out of denial. Now, one thing that will stop this dead in its track is if you believe as a leader, whether you're leading an entire church or a ministry area or a small group or whatever, if you believe that your role as the leader is to model a Christ-like character in all things, because if that's the case, you can't admit that you have any problems, right? Because you need to be like Jesus. Well, Christ-like character is a great aspirational goal. It's a great thing to aspire to. You're not going to achieve it in your lifetime. And the reality is there's probably people in your ministry area who are further along that road even than you are. I would encourage you to think instead of a much more helpful model, and that is to model how a broken, sinful human being accesses more of God's grace and truth and love and power, so they're one step closer to being like Jesus this week and this month than they were last week and last month. And that is an attainable goal, and it's also a goal that's really going to be helpful for the people that you're trying to serve. The other thing I would suggest is that you pay attention to the difference between competence growth and character growth. It's a lot easier sometimes for us to talk about our competence growth, that I need to grow in competence. I need to memorize more of Scripture. I need to spend more time praying. I need to study the Bible more. There are certain areas of my life where I need to grow, and that have to do with our competence. And that's a lot easier to talk about than our character growth. The places where I may be broken or flawed or where I'm selfish, places where I really need to grow my character in order to be more Christ-like. Now, it may be the case that there is no safety net for you as a leader. And without a safety net, you won't be able to come out of denial of the things that you need to come out of denial for. And so I would suggest, if you don't have that you find a safety net first, right? Get a good Christian therapist and let them know, hey, I don't have a safety net. I don't have any place where I can just be honest, and I'm not even sure what problems I will discover if I do become honest, but I need a place to do that. Can I do that with you? And then begin that relationship. And then from there, ask them to help you find a safe group, whether it's a therapy group or a recovery group somewhere that's anonymous enough where it doesn't feel risky for you. Find a place where you can be honest and safe and where you can come out of denial, because this is another one of those areas where leaders have to go first. This isn't something you can teach on and expect other people to do if you're not doing it yourself, and if you're not creating the environment where that can happen. This is an area where the fruit you bear on your own tree is the fruit you'll bear in your orchard. So if the fruit you bear on your tree is you're ignoring character growth and focusing in on competence growth, then your ministry area is going to be filled with people who ignore their character growth and focus in on competence growth. It's helpful to picture this as a stone that you throw in a pond, and there's the, where it lands, and then there's the ripple that moves out. Well, the stone in the pond is doing this in your own life, right? Having enough safety in your life where you can come out of denial without experiencing shame and experiencing hope, and then experience real growth. And if you do that in your life, it will ripple out to other people. Since it is such a common human challenge that people can have a problem and everyone in their life knows it's a problem except for them. And usually that's also accompanied by this idea that, man, if they could just see and change that one thing, it would unleash a whole different life for them that would be so much more fulfilling and enjoyable. Since that's true, what would it be like to live your life and exert your leadership influence in such a way that people could regularly discover those problems for themselves, and not only do it in a way that doesn't touch their shame, but do it in such a way that brings up hope and power for change? So let me invite you to practice this one simple step in connection with this video, and that is just to take a simple, honest inventory of your life and your leadership and ask yourself questions like, in my own goals and in the subjects that I focus in on, do I mostly focus in on competency issues, or do I also focus in on character issues? You could ask yourself, what was the last time I had that experience of coming out of denial and recognizing that, hey, this character issue is a real problem for me and it would be so beneficial for me to grow through this. If you think about the image of throwing a stone in a pond and then it rippling out, what would be the best ripple for you to focus in on next? Perhaps it's your own life and thinking, I really need to get a safety net for myself. Perhaps that's already been happening and you need to focus in on the next ripple on your inner team and creating a safety net there. Or perhaps, the ripple is further out. What ripple do you need to focus in on to create a culture where people can come out of denial and get hope for change? And the next question you could ask is, of the last 3 videos where we talked about the 4 levels of finding normal, or the one-up, one-down relationship versus peer-to-peer, or the star relationship where people are getting enough resources to change, which of those relational elements would it be good for you to focus on in the next year or so to create a culture so that people have enough safety and attachment and deep relationship to notice their real problems, and yet do it in a context where there's a lot of hope for change and growth? Simple steps, practice, practice, practice. That's what Heart Tools is all about.